Have you ever heard the name of a new dish and decided you wouldn't like it before you even tried it? I understand. But an open mind in the kitchen can lead to some incredible discoveries. Let me share a secret recipe. Discover an ingredient that fires your imagination. Choose other flavors to match. Find the best way to cook them. My secret recipe? Cooking without a recipe. Some adventuresome friends of ours are coming for dinner tonight. They're pretty advanced eaters, so I'm going to have some fun and see how far I can push the menu tonight. Now, we all have open minds, but sometimes it's hard to set our perceptions aside when it comes to food. How about a nice, rich beef stew with chocolate and cocoa? This will get everybody's attention. Actually, chocolate has long been used in savory dishes because cocoa, which is the dominant ingredient in good chocolate, has an earthy bitterness to it. It's perfect in rich savory dishes like a beef stew. In fact, used sparingly, it's just another spice, really. So enough about the chocolate. It's time to make a beef stew. When you're making a beef stew, there's a couple of really simple things you can do to make sure it turns out really tasty. First of all, the cut of meat you choose. The tougher the better. This is a blade steak, it's from the shoulder, and it's very tough. When an animal uses a particular muscle frequently, two things happen. It gets tougher, and it gets tasty. But since we value the cooking convenience of tender cuts of meat, the tougher, tasty cuts tend to be less expensive, which is a bonus for any cook looking for flavor. Now, the single most important step when you're making a beef stew, any beef stew, chocolate or otherwise, is searing the meat. Take a moment and dry the meat off because dry meat sears better. Dry meat develops more flavor. Now try not to overwhelm your pot. Just one single layer of meat down on the bottom is plenty, and that way all the meat gets a chance to evenly brown. Searing the meat is for building flavor. This is your best opportunity to build that rich, full-bodied flavor that defines a great stew. And once all your meat is nice and brown, you can just start piling the flavors into the pot. Onions, carrots, celery, known as mirepoix in French cooking, a classic flavor base for any stew, and so is a can of nice ripe tomato flavor. Next step, flavorful liquid, and lots of it. Beef broth, just enough to cover everything. At the moment, this is a very conventional beef stew, and it's going to be a very tasty beef stew too. But now for the fun part. It's time to add the aromatics that will distinguish this stew from other stews. It's time to add the chocolate. In fact, in Mexican cooking, there's a whole family of sauces known as moles, And moles feature a blend of herbs and spices, of chili peppers, and of chocolate, and they are some of the tastiest dishes you will ever try. Ground cumin, cinnamon, oregano, ancho peppers, a great way to add some authentic Mexican flavor to the stew, and a great way to balance the flavor of cocoa and chocolate. Now, cocoa does a lot more than just add flavor. It also adds body, richness. It actually helps to thicken up the sauce. Now for some cocoa. The chocolate will get added last. It's a finishing ingredient. We have some friends coming over for dinner tonight. They love a little culinary adventure. They're usually up for anything. So tonight I'll challenge their palates a bit with a few delicious but, shall we say, odd-sounding dishes. Like chocolate beef stew. Tough cubes of chuck beef braised until tender with onions, carrots, celery, ripe canned tomatoes, and beef stock. Pretty standard until it's flavored with cocoa and its Mexican friends cinnamon, cumin, and oregano. One of our strongest kitchen tools is an open mind, because a lot of times we judge dishes based on what they look like or what their name is and not what they taste like, rich and exotic. For example, if the name drunken pear makes you queasy, the taste of this dessert will cure that hang-up. And if an ingredient like chocolate can go into a savory dish, then why can't a savory flavor go into a sweet dish? Well, it can. How about a nice oaky Chardonnay with some honey and savory rosemary? Its woodsy aromatic fragrance is just as good with sweet flavors as it is with savory, especially with vanilla. These flavors go together easily. Poaching pears is as simple as simmering them in a flavorful sweet liquid until they're tender. And this definitely qualifies as a flavorful sweet liquid. Chardonnay and honey with rosemary and vanilla, now that's some flavor. To peel or not to peel? Whether 'tis nobler to just drop them in. Well, however you decide, you've got to get rid of the core. You've got to get those seeds out of the pear. All you need is a standard melon baller, and basically what you do is just get in there, dig it out until you don't see any more seeds. Now, since these are going to a party, I definitely want them to look appealing. And there's actually quite a few ways you can dress up a drunken pear. Perhaps the simplest is just to peel some vertical lines on it. A channel knife is always fun too. Now that's better, that's my favorite, but it's not the king. And voila, the king of pears. Actually, it's more like the court jester. And while the pears enjoy sipping their Chardonnay, here's a neat way to dress them up on the plate. Not that they're not already looking good, but it is a party, and phyllo's always a neat trick. In Greek, the word phyllo means leaf, and these are about as brittle as dried leaves. They're pretty easy to work with, though, if you remember a few things. First of all, pull them out of the freezer several days before you need them. They need to thaw slowly, or they'll disintegrate easily. Secondly, as you work with this sheet, keep the pile fresh, and the best way to do that is to cover it with a barely moist towel. Keep the air off it. So here's how to turn a couple of sheets of phyllo into crisp little baskets to help prop up those drunken pears. Brush a thin layer of melted butter on the first sheet. It doesn't take very much. Then, sprinkle on a little sugar. And believe it or not, add a little savory ground pepper too. Pepper's got flavor. There's a lot of aromatic flavor in here, and the heat is also a nice contrast to the sweetness of the pears. Then cover the first sheet of phyllo with one more. Pat it down, and while you work with it, remember to cover the stack back up, keep it fresh. Add a little bit more butter. Then cut the whole works into 6 even squares. And then all you need is your basket mold, a standard muffin pan. Layer your squares. And fit the works into the muffin pan, just like this. I wonder what my friends are going to think when they realize there's a little spicy heat in the dessert course. Drunken pears in a crispy basket. Keep an eye on these in the oven. When they're crispy and golden brown, they're done. Sometimes your best friend in the kitchen can be an open mind, because you never know when something seemingly crazy can end up tasting amazing. Like finishing a simple beef stew with rich grated dark chocolate. Or a ripe Bosque pear poached in a sweet Chardonnay and honey syrup flavored with rosemary and vanilla, ready to rest in a crisp phyllo basket. These pears are nice and tender now. It's time to turn off the heat and let them rest. And it sure looks like we're going to have some interesting dishes to talk about tonight. Now, normally I serve mashed potatoes with beef stew, but tonight I have a reputation to uphold, so I think I'll mash in something else creamy and white. Celery root. Whether or not you take the skin off a root vegetable is entirely up to you. You may have heard that the nutrients in a vegetable are all in the skin, and while it's true that they're concentrated near the skin, where the vegetable is still growing, the nutrients are actually scattered throughout the whole thing. And either way, I always take the roots off, because there's a lot of dirt hidden in down here.
You can do this.
Now when it comes to cooking root vegetables, your best bet for mashing them is to steam them first. That way you don't end up pouring any nutrients down the drain with the cooking water, or worse yet, any flavor. And if the name of your potato includes the words Yukon or Gold, you've definitely chosen a good masher. I love the flavor of celery root, but let's be honest. This is one of those vegetables that usually gets left behind at the supermarket, stranded in the produce section, lost with the lotus root, hanging out with the jicama, you know what I mean. There they are, sprinkled throughout the produce section. You don't have a sweet clue what it is, let alone how to pronounce it, cook it, or even eat it. I mean, does anyone actually buy this stuff? They must be one brave cook. But then again, someone had to eat the first oyster. And a potato's still a potato, even if it's purple. And greens are still greens, no matter what greens they are. So here's a challenge for you. Next time you're at the supermarket, try something new. Reach for it. You can do it, and bring it on home. Be brave. Tell yourself it's just a vegetable, and if it tries to bite you, throw some salt and pepper on it and bite it back. A nice warm home for a pair of wayward celery roots. They're nice and tender now. Now you can add any combination of milk, buttermilk, half and half cream, or even butter to a root vegetable puree. But check with your waistline before you decide. Milk and butter. And warm it up first before you add it in. You don't want to add a cold liquid. You'll drop the temperature of the puree, and cold liquids make potato purees gummy. And a little pinch of salt. Is that ever good? Sometimes the oddest looking vegetables have the most interesting flavors. Like Sputnik, otherwise known as kohlrabi, but unlike a space-bound satellite, these have a beautiful crisp texture and a flavor not unlike broccoli, but milder and sweeter. These have the sort of delicate vegetable flavor that you definitely don't want to hide. So all you really need to do is simmer them with a touch of water until they're nice and tender. A little bit of salt, and you don't have to peel them. Next time you see kohlrabi at the supermarket, bring them home. Have you ever heard a dish described and without even tasting it decided that's not for me? Like tripe or haggis or calf's liver? If I've learned anything about the world of food, it's that sometimes an open mind can be your best friend. But with our best friends coming for dinner tonight, I didn't want to spring cow or sheep stomach on them. They are pretty adventuresome eaters though, so I think I'm going to challenge their palate a bit with a sweet and savory dessert. Pears poached with rosemary, served in a crisp phyllo basket, and what goes better with any dessert than whipped cream with goat's cheese. This may seem like an odd flavor combination, but a little bit of goat's cheese is a great way to add a savory touch to the end of the meal, especially when you season the goat's cheese with a touch of honey and some good old-fashioned vanilla. All these flavors get along just fine with pear and Chardonnay and rosemary. All these things go together really well. All topped off with a Chardonnay, honey, rosemary, vanilla sauce, the poaching liquid that the pears cooked in, reduced to a syrup. But But before I can tantalize their tongue with dessert, I need to warm up their taste buds with some chocolate chili beef with celery root puree. Everything I need to make a savory sundae. And every sundae needs a little whipped cream, a little celery root potato puree. It looks like we're going to enjoy dessert before dessert this evening. You know, you can discover a new flavor or a new favorite too. All you have to do is open your mind and be prepared to welcome frog's legs, octopus steak, even beef with chocolate. Let's just say I had some fun cooking today. See if you can tell me what's in there.
All right, who's going first?
Tomato.
It's excellent. It's wonderful.
It's got chocolate in it. It's more of a seasoning, you know, like a spice sort of thing. And the white part, the ice cream looking part, that's celery root. As if one dessert wasn't enough, dig in. Here's to adventures in eating.